Silence is not absence. It is not emptiness. It is the unseen architecture of power that shapes the spaces between people. Every human being is conditioned from birth to search for sound, for answers, for reassurance in the voice of another. We are addicted to explanation, to dialogue, to confirmation that our fears are heard and our existence is acknowledged. Yet the moment silence descends, something primal awakens. The air grows heavier, the mind begins to race, and the heart measures every second of stillness as though it were a sentence. The power of silence lies in its refusal to give what we crave most, certainty. When words vanish, the imagination becomes restless, constructing narratives, doubts, and terrors to fill the void. In this way, silence is not passive, it is active warfare. It is a weapon that makes others fight against themselves while you stand untouched. When you do not answer, the other begins to wonder why. When you do not explain, their thoughts spiral into suspicion. When you refuse to react, they begin to project their guilt, their fear, their hidden intentions onto your stillness. And so, without lifting a hand, you control the battlefield. The unspoken word is heavier than the spoken one, because it cannot be refuted, cannot be dismissed, cannot be forgotten. It lingers in the mind like a shadow, reminding the other of everything they do not know, everything they cannot predict. History has shown that silence can unnerve rulers, in relationships, and fracture alliances more brutally than any argument. A single pause in the right moment can unravel trust that took years to build. The one who understands silence holds the sharper blade, because while words can be debated, silence cannot be disarmed. It is infinite. It cannot be cornered. It cannot be undone. And the weight of unspoken words crushes far deeper than the noise of 1,000 voices. There is a reason interrogators, manipulators, and masters of psychological warfare understand the potency of silence better than any sermon on patience. When words are withheld, the human mind turns against itself, unraveling in confusion and desperation. Imagine sitting across from someone who refuses to answer your question. You replay your own words in your head, searching for hidden meanings, wondering if you misspoke, fearing that your intent was misunderstood. The longer their silence stretches, the louder your doubts become. You feel naked, exposed beneath the weight of their gaze, as though their refusal to speak is a judgment greater than any insult. Silence strips away the comfort of noise, the cushion of dialogue, and replaces it with a mirror you cannot escape. You see yourself, raw and unfiltered, magnified by the emptiness between you and them. It is no coincidence that some of the most terrifying punishments in history involved silence, solitary confinement, exile, or the cold withdrawal of affection from someone you love. These are not punishments of violence, but of absence, yet they break men more surely than chains. To be met with silence is to be told, without words, that you are unworthy of reply, that your existence is too insignificant to deserve recognition. And that realization cuts deeper than any shouted insult, because it bypasses pride and strikes at the core of human need, the need to matter. Silence, in this way, becomes not merely an act of withholding, but an act of dominance. It asserts, I will not lower myself to meet you. You will rise, or you will collapse beneath your own uncertainty. And so the unspoken words grow heavier with each passing moment, carving scars into the mind that never heal. Those who master silence need not raise their voice to win battles. They only need to let the other drown in their own storm of questions. The sharpest truth about silence is that it forces responsibility back onto the one who cannot bear it. Words, once spoken, can be deflected, argued with, or dismissed, but silence leaves nothing to resist. It leaves only the echo of one's own conscience, one's own insecurities, and one's own secret fears. That is why the unspoken word is so destructive. It compels the listener to become both accuser and judge, tormentor and victim. In this way, silence is not neutral. It is a stage upon which the other performs their own downfall. They begin to recall past mistakes. They imagine offenses where none were intended, and they start to anticipate consequences that may never arrive. Silence bends time, turning seconds into hours, hours into days, each one stretching into unbearable tension. And the cruelest part is this: the wielder of silence has to do nothing but wait, while the other twists themselves into knots, inventing monsters in the dark. You remain still, untouched, untouchable. Entire relationships have collapsed under this pressure. Friendships, loves, alliances, because silence makes absence louder than presence. It whispers that you are irrelevant, that you are powerless, that you do not deserve even a syllable. For some, this realization shatters pride. For others, it drives them into frantic action, speaking too much, confessing too quickly, begging for reassurance that will never come. Silence is the invisible hammer that smashes fragile egos into dust. And those who grasp its weight know that words are often wasted where silence can reign. To stay silent is to demand attention without asking. To remain silent is to dominate without threat. To wield silence is to carve fear without lifting a blade. Silence has a peculiar cruelty. It does not simply withhold, it reflects. To stand before silence is to stand before a mirror that does not flatter, does not bend, does not distort, but instead throws back at you everything you are unwilling to face. When a man speaks, he chooses his words carefully, shaping them to conceal weaknesses, to impress, to persuade, to control the perception of others. But when that man is met with silence, his crafted words collapse under their own weight. There is no response, no validation, no recognition, only stillness. And in that stillness, he hears not the silence itself, but the echoes of his own insecurities. He begins to wonder whether his words were foolish, whether his intentions were misunderstood, whether his mask of confidence has slipped. Silence, then, becomes a mirror sharper than any truth spoken aloud, because it forces the other to project their hidden self into the void. Lovers have confessed secrets they never meant to reveal simply because the other remained silent. Enemies have overplayed their hand, revealing strategies and fears in a desperate attempt to break the unbearable weight of quiet. Silence draws out what noise conceals, because the human mind cannot tolerate a void. It rushes to fill it with assumptions, with stories, with confessions. The silence itself says nothing, but the one trapped within it speaks volumes they never intended to speak. And here lies the merciless genius of silence as a weapon. You need not accuse, you need not demand, you need not force. People will reveal themselves if you only refuse to fill the air for them. In your stillness, their hidden truths crawl out, uninvited, because they cannot bear the sound of their own conscience echoing back at them. Silence is the purest interrogation, for it asks nothing and yet demands everything. When someone refuses to answer, the burden shifts entirely onto you. Your mind begins to circle like a predator denied prey, pacing, restless, unsatisfied. You question your tone, your choice of words, your timing. Was the question too intrusive? Did you reveal too much? Did you expose a weakness without realizing it? Every possibility multiplies, feeding on itself, until the silence becomes unbearable. And yet the person who holds that silence does not need to lift a finger. They do not sweat. They do not explain. They do not defend. They simply remain. And in that stillness you begin to collapse inward. This is why silence is so feared in relationships, in politics, in negotiation. It is the unanswered message, the unreturned call, the cold pause in conversation that suggests not indifference, but judgment. A spoken rejection can be argued with, reasoned against, even softened over time. But silence leaves no door open, no line of attack. It is a wall without cracks, and the more you search for openings, the more you expose your own desperation. In the quiet, you begin to confess. You explain yourself more than necessary. You reveal anxieties you thought you had buried. You offer secrets, bargains, justifications, all in an attempt to earn back sound. Silence forces you to speak against yourself, because the void demands to be filled, and the human instinct is to fill it even if it destroys you. The mirror of silence does not simply reflect, it magnifies. It exaggerates your flaws, it amplifies your doubts, and it broadcasts them to the very person who holds power over you. That is why silence is never neutral. It is a stage where you are both the actor and the audience, performing your fears while the other watches without moving. The terrifying gift of silence is that it unmasks people without ever striking them. In the stillness, the truth that they work so hard to bury leaks through their own words, their own body, their own restless movements. Watch someone long enough without speaking, and you will see the subtle cracks appear, the nervous twitch, the shifting eyes, the forced laugh, the rambling explanations. They are not responding to you, but to the mirror you have placed before them. Silence turns the mind inward until it cannot bear its own reflection. Secrets spill not because they are asked for, but because the weight of silence crushes the ability to hold them. Imagine a lover confronted not with accusations, but with quiet. How quickly the guilt inside them rises. How quickly they fill the void with apologies, confessions, half-truths meant to ease the unbearable tension. Or imagine a rival who expects confrontation, only to find you unmoving, unreactive. Their aggression unravels into uncertainty, and from uncertainty into weakness, because silence does not provide the feedback they crave. Every person, no matter how strong, longs to be acknowledged, even by an enemy. When that acknowledgement is withheld, the self begins to fracture. That is the mirror's power. It reflects not the image you choose, but the image you cannot control. And once the reflection has been revealed, there is no taking it back. Words can be forgotten, but silence lingers, echoing long after the moment has passed. It haunts, because the victim of silence is never quite sure what was seen, what was judged, what was understood. Did they give away too much? Did their silence hide or expose them? That doubt burrows deeper than any spoken wound. And in the end, the one who wielded silence walks away armed with knowledge they never asked for, while the other is left naked, exposed, destroyed by their own reflection. Power is never as loud as people imagine. The kings who shout, the generals who threaten, the leaders who fill every silence with endless speeches. They look powerful, but in truth they betray their own weakness. Noise is a confession of insecurity, because only the uncertain feel compelled to explain themselves, to persuade, to remind others of their authority. True power does not need to shout. It exists in the calm, in the restraint, in the silence that cannot be moved. A master of power speaks less, because his silence already speaks enough. He knows that the moment he opens his mouth, he reduces himself to the level of those who argue and plead. But in silence, he remains above them, untouchable, undefined. Words can be twisted, misunderstood, and challenged, but silence cannot be contradicted. It leaves others with no weapon, no leverage, no opening. Imagine a ruler who sits in silence while his court bickers. Each advisor reveals their motives, their fears, their greed, while the ruler, saying nothing, sees everything. His silence becomes an aura, an invisible crown that makes others lower their voices, careful not to expose themselves. Or imagine a negotiator who answers demands with nothing but stillness. The other side grows frantic, offering more, conceding more, simply to fill the unbearable void. This is the language of power, not to chase, not to react, not to lower oneself into the noise of ordinary men, but to rule by absence. Silence communicates authority without declaring it, strength without proving it, dominance without violence. It whispers that you are beyond the need to explain, beyond the reach of their games. And nothing unsettles the human heart more than a power it cannot read, cannot provoke, cannot predict. That is why silence is feared, because it reveals nothing and controls everything. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the highest form of it. Every pause, every refusal to answer, every controlled stillness sends a message sharper than any crafted speech. To remain silent in the face of accusation is to say, "Your words are beneath me." To remain silent before praise is to say, "Your approval means nothing." To remain silent in the middle of chaos is to say, "I am the calm around which all storms revolve." This is why true rulers, whether kings, philosophers, or even masters of psychological strategy, have always used silence as their language. They understood that power is not displayed in constant declarations, but in deliberate restraint. The man who can resist the urge to fill the void controls not only himself, but everyone forced to stand in that void with him. Consider how quickly people crumble when met with silence after baring their soul. They feel their confession hang in the air, unanswered, judged without words, and they regret speaking at all. Or think of the child before a silent parent. No shouting, no lectures, only the weight of being seen without being addressed. That silence cuts deeper than punishment, because it makes the child confront themselves. In the same way, the silence of power forces every opponent, every subordinate, every admirer to confront their own smallness. They project onto the silence whatever they fear most. Some imagine contempt. Others imagine indifference. Still others imagine secrets too dangerous to reveal. And in that uncertainty lies the essence of dominance. Noise gives shape, but silence leaves mystery, and mystery is always more powerful than clarity. For what is unknown is always feared more than what is understood. Thus, the language of power is not the endless spilling of words, but the refusal to explain. It is the unshakable presence of one who does not need to be understood to be obeyed. The greatest trick of silence is that it turns time itself into an ally. Words are bound to the moment. They rise, they fall, they die as soon as they are spoken. But silence stretches, it lingers, it grows heavier with each passing second, transforming hesitation into pressure and pressure into submission. When a man asks you a question and you do not answer, each heartbeat becomes a hammer in his chest. Each second of your stillness feels like an eternity in which his own fears are amplified. He begins to interpret your silence as knowledge, as strategy, as judgment, as superiority. He imagines that you know more than you do, that you hold secrets you may not even possess, that you are calculating consequences he cannot predict. Silence feeds his paranoia until he begins to act not against you, but against the phantom you have planted in his mind. This is why the silent carry an aura others cannot match. They allow others to destroy themselves with their own imagination. And this aura is nearly impossible to strip away, because people will always project more into silence than silence itself contains. A commander who says nothing makes his soldiers wonder what he sees. An enemy who does not respond makes his rival fear traps and hidden blades. A lover who withholds words drives the other into obsession, because silence awakens hunger more fiercely than any promise of affection. The language of power is not only about what is communicated, but about what is withheld. For what is withheld becomes sacred, untouchable, feared. Those who master this language walk through life surrounded by mystery. And mystery is a shield stronger than steel. It is the unspoken aura that makes men cautious, women uncertain, enemies hesitant. The loud may command attention for a moment, but the silent command obedience without a sound. In the end, noise dies in the air, but silence endures in the mind, echoing long after the room has emptied. Chaos always begs for reaction. It thrives on voices raised in anger, on hurried explanations, on desperate attempts to seize back control. The louder the storm, the more it demands that you respond, that you match its violence with noise of your own. But the man who understands silence knows that chaos cannot survive without fuel. He knows that to respond is to be pulled into its rhythm, to allow the storm to dictate the rules of the game. When you withhold your words, when you refuse to be dragged into the noise, the chaos begins to devour itself. The aggressor who expected resistance feels cheated, robbed of the battle they were prepared to fight. Their rage turns inward, their certainty crumbles, and soon they begin to look foolish, shouting into a void, striking against an opponent who will not even raise a hand. Silence turns their fury into theater, exposing the ridiculousness of their tantrum for all to see. Think of an argument where one side falls into shouting while the other sits calm, unmoving. The louder one becomes, the weaker they look. The quieter one remains, the stronger their presence grows. The secret is simple. Silence denies chaos the satisfaction of your energy. Instead of meeting it head-on, you let it burn itself out, like a fire with no air to feed it. This is why silence is not just restraint, it is strategy. It forces disorder to collapse under its own weight, while you remain untouched, elevated, untouchable. In the battlefield of human interaction, noise is always the weapon of the desperate, while silence is the weapon of the strong. For silence declares, without words, you cannot move me. You cannot pull me into your storm. You will destroy yourself before you ever touch me. The essence of chaos is hunger. It feeds on the attention you give it, on the energy you spend trying to correct it, explain it, or resist it. Every word you offer becomes a brick in the wall it builds around you, until you find yourself trapped inside the very madness you tried to oppose. But silence is starvation. It denies chaos the nourishment it craves, and in that starvation it begins to collapse. Picture a man screaming accusations, his veins swollen, his face twisted with rage. If you respond in kind, his fire grows. If you argue, his frenzy finds purpose. If you defend yourself, he gains new ground. But if you sit in silence, the noise begins to echo back on him. His words sound hollow, his gestures exaggerated, his fury absurd. Others begin to see it too, the spectacle of a man battling ghosts while you remain still. This is why silence is more than defense. It is counterattack. By refusing to give chaos what it needs, you expose its futility, and in doing so, you weaken the one who wields it. History is full of tyrants who thrived on resistance, rebellions, arguments, opposition, all of which gave them reason to tighten their grip. Yet when met with silence, with absence, with withdrawal, their power withered. They depended on the noise of their enemies to justify their cruelty, and without it, they turned their blades inward. Chaos cannot stand alone. It must be answered, and when you refuse to answer, it dissolves. That is why silence, though it may appear passive, is in truth an active weapon. It is the unseen wall that chaos cannot climb, the invisible rope that lets the storm strangle itself. And the one who wields it does not need to move, does not need to prove, does not need to shout. He need only wait, and in time, chaos will tear itself apart. The silence that defeats chaos is not merely the absence of words, but the presence of control. Anyone can bite their tongue for a moment, but true silence requires mastery over the instinct to defend, to explain, to lash back. It is not an act of weakness, but of immense discipline, for in silence you refuse to play the game that chaos demands. To sit still while storms rage around you is to declare, without sound, that you are unshaken. And in that declaration lies the deepest cut. For chaos is childish. It screams for attention. It claws for recognition. It thrives on the belief that it can pull you down into its frenzy. When you remain silent, you rob it of meaning. You make clear that its violence is not equal to your calm, that its noise cannot disturb your ground. This realization drives chaos into desperation, and desperation always reveals the truth. People who depend on noise to dominate others cannot survive without your reaction. They grow louder, more erratic, more exposed, until finally they collapse beneath the weight of their own frenzy. Silence, therefore, is not escape, it is victory. It is the refusal to legitimize madness with your voice, the choice to let disorder destroy itself rather than allow it to touch you. Picture a battlefield where one side hurls insults, threats, and provocations, while the other stands in perfect stillness. The silence becomes heavier than the noise. It radiates strength. It unsettles the attackers. It makes the loud appear desperate and small. This is the paradox of power. Those who shout for control are slaves to their own chaos. But those who remain silent command not only themselves, but the very space around them. And in the end, chaos always burns itself out. Its fire consumes its own fuel. Its noise exhausts its own voice. But silence endures. Silence waits. Silence watches as chaos drowns in its own storm. There is no punishment sharper than absence. To strike someone is to acknowledge them, to curse them, to argue with them, even to hate them. These are still forms of recognition. They confirm that the other exists, that their presence is strong enough to provoke you, that their words or actions have weight. But silence, true silence, denies them this most basic confirmation. It erases them from the stage, casting them into the void where their voice no longer matters. To be ignored is to be told, without words, that you are nothing, that your presence is too small to disturb the air, that your cries, your explanations, your pleas are not worth even a syllable in return. This is why people fear silence more than insult. A sharp tongue wounds the pride, but silence wounds the soul. It whispers that you are invisible, replaceable, forgotten. And the more you demand response, the more crushing the silence becomes. Imagine reaching for someone you love, confessing your mistakes, begging for their forgiveness, only to be met with a gaze that does not answer, a mouth that does not move. In that moment, you are not just rejected, you are erased. Absence becomes a mirror of your deepest fear, that you do not matter. And this punishment leaves scars no physical blow could ever create. Because words, once spoken, can be remembered, can be replayed, can be challenged. But silence offers nothing. It leaves you alone with your thoughts, your regrets, your doubts, until they gnaw through you like wolves in the dark. That is why silence is merciless. It does not kill you at once, but makes you live with your own voice echoing back unanswered, until you wish for even anger, even hatred, anything that would mean you are still seen. The cruelty of absence lies in its invisibility. When someone strikes you, you can point to the wound. When they curse you, you can replay the words. But when they erase you with silence, there is nothing to hold, nothing to show, nothing to fight against. You are left suspended in uncertainty, and uncertainty is the most torturous of all prisons. You begin to question everything. Did they hear you? Did they understand? Do they care? Or worse, do they no longer care enough to answer? This abyss of not knowing corrodes the mind far more than open hostility. Hatred still binds two people together, but silence severs the tie completely, cutting you adrift into isolation. The absence becomes louder than words ever could, echoing in the empty spaces where replies should be, in the void where recognition once lived. It forces you to listen to yourself, and that is where the torment begins. Every mistake resurfaces. Every flaw grows louder. Every fear you buried claws its way upward because there is no external voice to drown it out. Silence, in this way, turns the victim against themselves. It is not a blow from outside, but a weapon that forces you to self-destruct from within. This is why absence is not passive, it is active domination. To withhold presence, to refuse acknowledgement, to vanish into quiet, is to make the other live in a limbo where even anger would be a mercy. And the deeper the bond once was, the sharper the punishment becomes. The silence of a stranger is irrelevant, but the silence of someone you love can drive you mad. Because what you are losing is not only their voice, it is the certainty of your own worth reflected in their recognition. That is the cruelty of absence. It strips you not of them, but of yourself. The silence of absence is not a wound that bleeds, it is a wound that lingers. Time does not heal it, time deepens it. The longer you wait for words that never come, the heavier the silence grows, until it presses on your chest like a weight you cannot lift. And in that suffocating stillness, people unravel. Some lash out in desperation, speaking louder, acting recklessly, trying to force a response. But this only feeds the silence further, making their gestures look small, pitiful, hollow. Others collapse inward, consumed by self-doubt, convinced that their worth has dissolved into nothingness. This is why absence is so devastating. It forces the victim to do the executioner's work themselves. It makes them tear at their own identity, question their own meaning, destroy their own confidence. And the one who wields silence as punishment does not need to shout, does not need to argue, does not even need to move. They only need to withhold themselves. That is the brilliance of absence. It allows you to dominate without action, to win without war, to cut deeper than any insult ever could. And yet, this power carries with it a dark truth. For to wield absence effectively, you must be willing to become a ghost in the life of another. You must abandon not only their pleas, but also your own desire to explain, to justify, to comfort. You must learn to vanish with precision, to close the door and never open it, to let your silence echo louder than your presence ever did. This is not a weapon for the faint-hearted, because absence does not wound others alone. It turns you into something colder, harder, less forgiving. And once you have mastered it, you cannot return to the world of easy words and soft comfort. You will know the sharpness of silence, and you will never forget how cleanly it cuts. Fear is born not from what we know, but from what we cannot see. A visible enemy can be measured, studied, confronted, but silence creates a void, and the human mind cannot tolerate voids. It rushes to fill them with shadows. When someone remains silent, their stillness becomes a canvas onto which our deepest anxieties are painted. What are they thinking? What do they know? What do they plan? The absence of words is far more terrifying than any declaration, because words have boundaries, but silence has none. An insult ends after it is spoken. A threat has limits. But silence has no end, no edge, no conclusion. It lingers, it grows, it multiplies. In that endlessness, fear takes root. It makes you wonder whether the other is calm because they are weak, or because they are planning something far greater than you can imagine. It unsettles you, makes you cautious, makes you doubt your own strength. History shows this again and again. The most dangerous generals, the most feared rulers, were not those who shouted endlessly, but those who waited, who spoke rarely, who allowed their enemies to drown in uncertainty. Their silence was not emptiness, it was presence amplified. It suggested secrets, strategies, punishments beyond comprehension. And in that suggestion lay the true terror. For fear does not need confirmation to grow, it thrives on imagination. Silence is the soil in which imagination grows wild, where doubts become monsters, and where even the bravest find themselves glancing over their shoulder. This is the shadow of fear, the understanding that silence may not be nothing at all, but the quiet breathing of a predator you cannot yet see. The power of silence lies in its ability to make others destroy themselves with their own imagination. A spoken threat gives the enemy something to resist. They can prepare, sharpen their defenses, gather allies. But when you say nothing, when you let silence spread like fog, they are forced to build their own prisons. They wonder what you know that they do not. They obsess over what punishment might be coming. They search for patterns in your quiet, inventing schemes and conspiracies, until their paranoia weakens them more than any direct attack ever could. In this way, silence becomes the architect of fear, not because it strikes openly, but because it forces others to strike themselves. Consider the silence of the interrogator who lets a suspect speak until they unravel, confessing crimes out of sheer terror of what the interrogator might know. Or the silence of a ruler who refuses to explain his decisions, leaving every subject guessing, afraid to make a wrong move, unable to predict his next step. That uncertainty is more powerful than any visible display of force, because force can be measured, but silence is infinite, and the infinite terrifies us. Silence whispers that the other may have endless patience, endless strength, endless knowledge, that they are beyond reach, beyond manipulation, beyond defeat. It casts a shadow where no form can be seen, and that shadow becomes larger than life. This is why silence is not passive at all. It is psychological warfare. It is a reminder that you are not entitled to answers, not worthy of clarity, not safe from the unknown. And in that void, people bend. They submit, not because they are beaten, but because their own fear convinces them they already are. Fear thrives in silence because silence cannot be read. A word reveals intention, a gesture exposes emotion, but silence is impenetrable. It forces the other to question, are you merciful or are you cruel? Are you watching with patience or waiting with malice? The silence offers no answer, and so the mind invents the darkest one. That is why it is more powerful than violence. Violence is honest. It tells you what the other intends. But silence hides, and in that concealment lies an endless horizon of possible punishments. The victim begins to rehearse conversations in their head, explaining, defending, pleading, but none of it is heard. They replay scenarios over and over, torturing themselves with visions of outcomes that may never come. The silence becomes a ghost, haunting them in every decision, every thought. Even when you are absent, your silence lingers like a shadow draped across their mind. And this is the ultimate strength of silence. It is a mask that does not slip. Anger can betray you. Words can trap you. Emotion can weaken you. But silence hides everything. It makes you unreadable, and what cannot be read cannot be controlled. Instead, it controls others by leaving them blind, stumbling in fear of what lies behind the curtain. In this way, silence is not only a weapon but a throne. It elevates you above those trapped in noise, giving you command over their imagination, their doubts, their dread. And when someone fears what they cannot see, they do not fight you. They fight themselves, and they lose long before you ever lift a hand. That is the shadow of fear, the silence that enslaves others not with chains, but with the endless weight of what they do not know. There comes a point where words lose their weight. Arguments circle endlessly, accusations pile upon each other, apologies repeat until they are stripped of meaning. In this endless storm of sound, silence descends like a guillotine. It ends what speech cannot. It closes doors that argument keeps open. It is the final word because it refuses to be a word at all. Silence declares an ending more powerful than any phrase of triumph or surrender. To fall silent in the face of conflict is to declare that nothing more needs to be said, that the matter is dead, the bond severed, the judgment final. This is why silence carries a gravity that words can never replicate. It is absolute. A spoken farewell can be challenged, misunderstood, softened. But silence cannot be argued with. It cannot be bent or reshaped. It is solid, immovable, final. When someone chooses silence, they are no longer in dialogue. They have stepped outside of the conversation altogether, leaving the other trapped in echoes. That is why it wounds so deeply. It does not end in clarity, but in absence. It leaves no resolution, no comfort, no closure. And in that void, the one left behind spirals, replaying every detail, searching for meaning, inventing explanations, hoping for a sound that will never come. In this way, silence is not only a weapon but a verdict. It declares that you are beyond argument, beyond persuasion, beyond reconciliation. You have spoken your last without speaking at all, and the one who receives that silence is forced to face the unbearable truth that they no longer matter enough to deserve even a single word. The cruelty of silence as the final word is that it denies the other the chance to fight. When you argue, you leave a door open. When you insult, you invite retaliation. Even when you say goodbye, you give the other something to respond to. But silence offers no battlefield. It leaves them swinging their sword into empty air, exhausted by combat that never begins. They cannot change your mind, cannot soften your heart, cannot redeem themselves, because your silence has already declared judgment. And that judgment is absolute. They are unworthy of answer. That is why silence stings deeper than rejection, for rejection still acknowledges that you exist. Silence tells you that you do not. It is the final word because it is not even a word. It is an execution. It buries the past without ceremony, without explanation, without the courtesy of grief. And in that burial, the other is left alone with ghosts. They replay every word they once spoke to you, weighing them, twisting them, wondering which one led to this unspoken end. The mind becomes its own torturer, inventing scenarios, rewriting memories, searching for reasons that silence will never reveal. In this way, silence transforms from absence into presence. It haunts, it lingers, it echoes louder than speech ever could. The one who wields it gains not only distance, but control. They write the last chapter without ink, closing the book with a weight that cannot be lifted. For in silence there is no negotiation, no reversal, no appeal. It is the coldest form of closure because it refuses to give closure at all. And once silence has spoken, nothing else can. There is a silence that lasts a moment, and there is a silence that lasts forever. The first is hesitation, a pause, a breath before the next strike. The second is finality, a void that nothing can cross. When silence becomes eternal, It is no longer merely a strategy, but a destiny. It is the closing of a door that will never open again, the extinguishing of a flame without even smoke to remember it by. And this is what makes it the final word. It does not just end the conversation. It ends the possibility of conversation. It is the unmarked grave where relationships, loyalties, and histories are buried without epitaph. What remains is only absence, a silence so heavy it cannot be lifted, so complete it cannot be broken. This silence does not shout its dominance. It simply exists, immovable, undeniable. It requires nothing from you, not even acknowledgement, because it has already decided. You may scream into it, weep into it, beg into it, but it will not answer, for it is beyond you. And in that realization lies the deepest cut, the understanding that silence does not merely defeat you. It erases the ground on which you hoped to stand. It declares, without voice, that there is nothing left to fight for, nothing left to save. Only the void. And the void is eternal. This is why silence, when wielded as the final word, is sharper than any weapon forged by human hands. It kills without spilling blood, dominates without striking, punishes without end. It is the closing curtain on the stage of human connection, leaving only the echo of what once was. And the echo fades. What remains is the stillness, cold and endless. The silence that does not end because it is the end,